Okay, so the lift experiment one worked out pretty well. It's about the same height in entry-exit mode, and that's as expected because it's on the bump stop. I'll show you that. And then in arrow mode, it's about ½ inch higher. In normal mode, it's 1 inch higher than it was before. And in off-road mode, it's 1.5 inches higher than it was before. So I basically achieved a 1.5 inch rear lift in off-road mode, but on the highway in arrow mode, it's only ½ inch higher. And that's good because it's not, you know, stupid high in the back, hurting gas mileage and stuff, which I don't even know if that would be bad for gas mileage. I think it might be good for it. I'm not sure. But shouldn't affect gas mileage on the highway at all. But when I'm in off-road mode, I get 1.5 inch higher rear of the truck, which helps departure angle, breakover angle, stuff like that. So here's how I did it. I just changed the mounting location for the sensor that tells the truck its height in the rear. So it used to be on the little black ball, and then I added a screw farther forward, filed that screw head down and polished it into like a ball, a little Phillips screw. And now the sensor is hooked up in a different location on the control arm, which tricks the truck, the computer, into thinking the rear is lower than it is. And because I moved it forward instead of just moving it up or down, it also helps with my range of travel. Because of geometry and the control arm traveling on an arc at the bottom, the closer you are to the pivot point of the control arm with that little arm, the less the sensor moves. So the truck thinks it's not moving the rear suspension as much, and it's moving it more. So basically the truck thinks the rear suspension is still doing the same thing it does stock, but in actuality, it's actually giving me more range of travel. The reason I wanted to do this was to match the front. The front had 5.5 inches of travel. The rear only had 3 inches, even though the rear of the truck has, you know, more travel overall because it's a solid axle and it's got a longer shock and it's not A-arms and a strut and everything like that. You can't really mess with the front in this truck. Well, you shouldn't, because in off-road mode, there's only 2 inches of down travel in the front. That's not great, and you definitely don't want to make less down travel than that, right? That's what people do when they put stack lift kits. They drive around with no down travel. It's dangerous. It's not good for the suspension, etc. Yes, I would like to be able to drive the truck a little bit lower in the front than in arrow mode. So I may mess with the linkage a little bit just to try to get arrow mode a little bit lower, maybe drop the front 1 inch just in arrow mode, I'm trying to figure out the geometry for that. But what I want to do in the rear was make the rear have more travel. So stock, the rear had 3 inches of travel. Now the rear has 4.5 inches of travel, which is a lot closer to the front's 5.5 inches of travel. So it might cause some issues eventually. I'm not sure how it's going to do with loading and towing because it might freak the computer out because it's having to put a lot more pressure into the airbags to get to the same ride height because it does, well, what it thinks is the same ride height. So the trailer could be interesting, so we'll have to see how that works out. I'm sure there's stuff in the truck that's actually measuring its attitude as well. So this may make the truck angry eventually, but we're gonna see how it works for now. I can always snap that ball off and put it back on its factory location in a second with my bare hands. So it's not like it's a hard thing to revert to, and it's kind of a temporary little deal. But it is funny and interesting. The next thing we need to test on this truck is how well the back and the front suspension flexes. That should also be pretty. So playing with the air suspension on the Ram again, and I just realized that it doesn't have very much down travel when you're in off-road mode. So 22.25 to the bottom of the bottom of the toe point, and that tire is just barely off the ground. And if I set it down, it only goes to 20 1/8. So when you're in off-road mode, you only have 2 inches of down travel. And I felt that at Holopaw. You could definitely feel it bottoming out the lower end. So that's why you can't get much more of the air suspension. I could trick it and make it hold itself up a little bit higher, but you really don't want to because it already has very little down travel when you're in off-road mode. Obviously, the next thing to do is check the rear. Hopefully the rear has more. So that's the truck with the tires just barely touching the ground. And I had to jack it up from 24.5 to 29 inches at the hitch. So 4.5 inches more down travel when you're in off-road mode. So the rear has a lot more travel to play with than the front. So I think I'm gonna try to modify the off-road mode to lift the back higher. The front, you're really getting full range of travel that you really want to use with off-road mode. The rear, you could get a little more out of it. So I'm gonna play with it. But I'm really interested to get a non-off-road Ram and see if it's the same. I suspect it's going to be, but this is pretty interesting. So you only have 2 inches of down travel in the front when you're in off-road mode, but in the rear, you have 4.5. So experimenting more with the Ram suspension after taking it to Holopaw, which it did great at, by the way, but I did notice that I felt a lack of down travel in the front of the truck when in off-road mode. And that feeling was correct. If you take the truck and put it in off-road mode and jack it up so the tires come off the ground, you only have 2 inches of down travel. It's not much down travel. Truck in entry exit mode, AKA slammed. Entry exit mode, the truck is sitting on the bump stop. No one believes me, but that's the bump stop, people, and the truck's sitting against the plate. So you can't make it any lower than entry exit mode. There's people that claim they have lowering kits for these that lower the truck like 3 inches. They're just letting you drive around on the bump stop, which is terrible and dangerous, and I can't believe people are selling that. So entry exit mode is about the same, right? Because it just goes down to the bump stop. But what I did was I have it go up a lot higher now. So let's take a measurement. In entry exit mode, same way we've been doing it on the hitch. Let's call that 15 7/8 inches. And here's off-road mode, 19 7/8. All right, guys, there it is with my lowering mod. So again, just to recap, took the rear links from the position sensor, moved them to the front, and then made some custom ones in the rear that are 3/8 of an inch shorter, and that resulted in lowering the front of the truck 1.5 inches and the rear of the truck 1.25 inches in aero mode. That is as low as you want the rear of the truck because you're very close to the bump stop. You're actually just barely kissing it. I'll show you that in a second, which is about as low as you want to go. The front, I could go a little lower if I made a custom link, but I also don't want to hit the front bump stop because it's an internal bump stop and that could be bad. So I think this is about as low as I'm going to go. So that's just the rear link transferred to the front. So very easy to do. You could do it in 10 minutes now that I've done the experimenting for you. Now remember, this is on an off-road. These results will differ if you do this on a non-off-road. I think they have different bump stop locations in the rear, and they definitely have different suspension presets. So you can see that we're just kissing the bump stop. It's not compressed at all, but we are touching it, and that's what you want. That took a lot of trial and error. I originally had it where it was way too much on the bump stop. So we got that straightened out now. And if you measure it, I'm sitting 1/2 inch higher in the rear than I am in entry exit mode before I lowered it. So I'm not quite driving around in entry exit mode. Now there are, you could get a little lower if you wanted to ride on the bump stops, but that's not good ride quality and it's probably not safe. So overall, experiment 2 is a success. Experiment 3 will be to try to combine the results of experiment 1 and experiment 2 and get this aero mode right here. So I'm taking a bunch of measurements, match this aero mode while still getting my factory off-road mode. And off-road mode right now, because of my mods, it's pretty proportional. I'm about 1 inch lower in off-road mode. So obviously don't want to give up any ground clearance. This is the rear link that goes from the upper control arm to the position sensor on the RAM to tell the computer how high the truck is. If you want to lower the truck, all you have to do is make some new links. We're going to try lowering it, mostly to see if it affects gas mileage, but also just to be funny. So these are 8mm balls, which coincidentally also is my Arma Creighton. And my Arma Creighton keeps having tie rod popping off issues, so it's a great opportunity to fix that. So I have all new tie rods for the Arma, a little upgraded. These are the 8mm balls they go on. So the steering tie rods and these tie rods back here are all 8mm. As you can see, they're also great candidates for replacing these guys. So you took a screw, snapped off the tip, snapped off the head, go ahead and screw that into those plastic things. And then I have an adjustable linkage and I can adjust the height of my truck. So in the rear, to make it lower, you want to make this a little shorter. So I'm going to make it 1/2 inch shorter, and then obviously I'll have a lot of adjustability. You can see almost 1 inch of adjustability to fine tune it. My goal is going to be when I'm in aero mode, I want to be 1/2 inch from the bump stop. Or, maybe 1/4 inch, right? Because the bump stop's squishy. So just basically not touching the bump stop in aero mode, but close to it. The front's going to be a little trickier because you can't see the bump stop. So the front's going to involve some measurements and kind of going off of that because the bump stop is internal to that big strut assembly. There's the front little arm guy. You could still use entry exit mode with this setup. It might be a bad idea. It's going to confuse the computer, but because entry exit mode just sits on the bump stop, it might be okay, I guess. So notice something cool. So in the front, because the sensor is mounted beneath the control arm, you actually need a longer link to make the truck think that it's higher up than it is, so it rides lower. So to lower the front, you need a longer link. To lower the rear, you need a shorter link. So I just took the rear links, which is the long one here. This is the front. The rear ones are already a little bit longer. So I just swapped the rear links onto the front, and that should lower the front substantially. Obviously not adjustable like my drywall screw method, but we'll see what it gets us. So I'm gonna put it in arrow mode, drive back and forth and take some measurements and compare those to my measurements taken previously. So something funny happened. The truck doesn't want to lower now, and that's because it thinks it's already way higher than it should be. It was in off-road mode, and then I changed the links to make it think it was higher in order to make it lower itself. So it's really confused right now. So I'm gonna go drive it around and see if that lets it reset and lets it lower itself, or maybe it'll just throw a fault code. We're gonna find out. You might have to install these links in like normal mode and not in off-road mode where it's already as high as it could possibly be. All right, so if we hit the button now, it'll tell us that tire jack mode is active. So it thinks we put it in tire jack mode, or we have it jacked up. The car thinks the wheels are on the ground, which is what makes sense. So, okay, so after putting the stock links back on, it quickly unconfused itself. So now I'm gonna try to do this part at a time. Also, I had the rears way too short, so we're gonna make the rears a little bit longer, put them a 1/4 inch shorter than the stock rears. Let the rear settle, then change the front. The front may also be too much change, but I think we can make it work. So we're gonna try that again. Definitely don't try change front and rear at once. It really freaked it out. The truck's okay with the rear being off because of loading and things like that. That can change. The front being off a lot, especially starting in off-road mode, made it go into tire jack mode automatically. So pro tip, put in arrow mode while you're changing all these things, and do the rear, let it settle, then do the front. And the bump stops are pretty close. So I think that for off-road trucks, they may have dropped the bump stops for bigger tire clearance. So again, we need to compare all this to a non-off-road Ram for you guys, but that's with the new links on the rear. I'll call them the Arma RC car links. Boom. Very premium.